I used to think my future was built one psychology lecture at a time, until the day my parents handed me a job application instead of tuition forms. The early April chill still clung to the windows of our family's house in Apple Creek, Ohio, when I got home from campus that evening. My fingers were still tingling from the breeze that swept through the university's quad, where tulips were trying their best to bloom through the stubborn Midwest frost. I had just come from Professor Leland's lecture on trauma and resilience. It was the kind of talk that left your soul humming, the kind that reminded you why you started this path in the first place. Mom was already in the kitchen, dicing onions with military precision. The smell of something buttery and comforting filled the air, but it couldn't ease the knot in my stomach that had been building all week. Something had shifted in the house, recently, less warmth in the greetings, more hushed conversations behind half-closed doors. "Dinner's in 10," Mom said without turning around. I murmured thanks and started toward my room, planning to reread my lecture notes. That's when the front door slammed open. Kendra breezed in, the scent of department store perfume following her like a trail of glitter. She held up 2 shopping bags like they were trophies. "You will not believe the deal I got on these sneakers," she said, already kicking off her boots by the door. "Limited edition, half price. It's like the universe wants me to succeed in med school." Dad emerged from the living room with a proud chuckle. Our little doctor in the making. I stood there, half out of my coat, invisible. Dinner was baked chicken with mashed potatoes and green beans, Mom's midweek go-to. We ate around the same oval oak table we'd had since I was 8, now with one leg shorter than the others thanks to a loose screw. Kendra was already scrolling on her phone, talking about a med school prep course she found online. I chewed slowly, bracing myself. Dad cleared his throat and placed a folded sheet of paper next to my plate. "Grace," he said, "your mom and I need to talk to you about something important." My pulse kicked up. The paper was an application form for the Whistle Stop, a local diner off Route 42. I looked up, confused. "We've decided," he said carefully, "that it's time for you to take a break from school." Mom nodded, her voice quick to follow. "It's just not sustainable right now. Kendra got accepted into that prep program, and tuition isn't cheap." I blinked. "You want me to drop out?" "Just for a while," Dad said. "Pick up some shifts, help with expenses. Your sister's going to be a doctor. It's an investment." Kendra didn't even look up. "Besides, Grace, you're just in psychology. You can go back any time." I gripped my fork. "It's not just psychology. I'm 1 year away from graduating." "We all make sacrifices," Mom said, reaching for the salt shaker. That's when something inside me cracked, not loudly, but enough to echo in my ribs. I swallowed my reply, left my dinner half finished, and carried my plate to the sink with trembling hands. That night, I sat on my bed with my textbooks open but unread. Outside, the wind picked up, shaking the bare branches against my window like restless fingers. My phone vibrated. A message from Grandpa Raymond. "I've been thinking about you lately. Call me." I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the reply button. Then I looked back at the job application sitting on my desk, still smelling faintly of printer ink and mashed potatoes. Some people say the best conversations happen over coffee. I just didn't expect mine to begin with tears. The next morning, I left the house, before sunrise, needing air that didn't carry the weight of family expectations. The streets of Apple Creek were still quiet, the kind of hush you only get before the town wakes up. I walked with no real destination in mind, my boots crunching over the frost-tipped sidewalk until I found myself standing outside Sunset Brew. The cafe's windows glowed with soft yellow light, promising warmth and the comfort of routine. I pushed open the door, greeted by the familiar chime and the scent of cinnamon and roasted beans. It smelled like home, well, the kind of home I always imagined, where someone notices when you're not okay. Mrs. Clarice Becker stood behind the counter, wiping down the pastry case. She looked up and smiled, that gentle smile that somehow always cut through the noise. "Grace Whitmore," she said, drying her hands. "You're early, or maybe you just needed to be somewhere." I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. My throat closed up, and instead of words, tears spilled onto my cheeks, quiet, determined ones I didn't ask for. Clarice rounded the counter in an instant and led me to a booth by the window, the one with the seat cushion that sagged slightly to the left. She placed a warm cup in front of me, then sat across, waiting. Not prying, just present. "I'm dropping out," I whispered, staring into the steam. She didn't flinch. "Oh, sweetheart, they handed me a job application last night," I said, voice trembling. "Said it's time I help the family. Kendra's going to med school, and apparently psychology is just a hobby." Clarice leaned back, her eyes scanning my face. "You've come here every Saturday since you were 16, she said softly. "Always with a book, always focused. That's not a hobby, that's a call-in." The words hit somewhere deep, somewhere long ignored. "I've spent years working toward this," I said. "And now it's just gone." Clarice reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "I wasn't sure when the right time was. Maybe this is it." I took it, fingers shaky. Inside was a folded sheet of stationery paper, slightly yellowed at the edges, a letter. It was from Clarice, dated last year, a recommendation. "To whom it may concern," it began, "I've watched Grace Whitmore grow into a young woman of fierce intelligence and quiet strength. I wrote it after one of your study sessions here," Clarice said. "You didn't know, but I saw something in you. I thought maybe you'd apply for that local scholarship through the community board. I should have given it to you sooner." My eyes welled again. "Thank you," I managed. She placed a hand over mine. "You don't owe your dreams to anyone else's path, Grace." We sat in silence for a while, sipping coffee, letting the weight of things settle. Eventually, Clarice nodded toward my phone on the table. "You've got someone in your corner, don't you? That grandfather of yours?" I thought of the message from last night. I hadn't replied. "Call him," she said, squeezing my hand. "I have a feeling he's been waiting for the right time, too." I nodded slowly, clutching the envelope close. I wasn't sure where this path would lead, but for the first time since dinner last night, I felt the tiniest flicker of something warm, not just from the coffee, from being seen. I thought I was calling Grandpa to feel less alone. I didn't expect to discover my life had been stolen. Back in my room, the silence felt heavier than ever. The ceiling fan made its slow, rhythmic turn above me as I sat cross-legged on the carpet, Clarice's envelope resting in my lap. The letter inside had been read and reread at least 5 times since I left the cafe. Every word echoed what I had long hoped someone would finally say out loud, that I mattered, that I was seen. I glanced toward my desk, where my psychology textbook still lay open to the chapter I was reviewing before everything changed. I couldn't bring myself to close it, even though I wasn't sure when I'd get to study again. My phone buzzed softly on the floor beside me. Grandpa's message still sat unread. I tapped it open. Just 5 words. "I've been thinking about you." My thumb hovered over the call button, hesitation bubbling in my chest. Would he be disappointed? Would he blame me for not fighting harder? But somewhere deep down, I knew Grandpa wasn't like that. He'd always been the one person who spoke to me like I was an equal, not a responsibility. I pressed call. The dial tone barely rang twice before his voice came through, warm and unmistakably his. "Gracie?" "Hi, Grandpa," I said, already choking up. "Oh, honey, it's so good to hear your voice." I could hear the gentle clatter of dishes in the background and imagined him in his little Florida kitchen, early evening light spilling across the counter. I tried to keep my tone even, light, but he knew he always did. "What's going on, sweetheart?" he asked. "You don't sound like yourself." The dam broke. I told him everything, from the dinner conversation to the job application, from the tears in the cafe to the letter Clarice had given me. I didn't spare the ugly parts, how invisible I felt, how unfair it all seemed. He was quiet for a long moment after I finished. Then his voice took on a tone I hadn't heard in years, firm, steady, tinged with something sharp. "Grace," he said slowly, "I've been transferring money into an educational trust for you every year since your 18th birthday. For college, for graduate school. I told your parents. I made sure they knew." I sat upright, heart pounding. "What?" I set it up with the bank in Columbus, the account's in your name, though your parents were listed as custodians until you turned 21. I thought, I thought everything was fine. My mind was spinning. Custodians. That meant they had access, control, and they never told me. Instead, they handed me a job application. I swallowed hard. How much was in it? About 80 grand by now, he said. It was supposed to carry you through, all the way. I covered my mouth with my hand. $80,000. That could have paid for tuition, rent, books, my entire future. They used it, didn't they? I whispered. I don't want to believe it, he said gently, but it sure sounds like they did. Tears welled up again, but this time they burned. Not the quiet tears of sadness. These were different. These were hot with betrayal. I need you to come here, Grandpa said. Tomorrow. I'll book the ticket tonight. Don't pack much. We'll get you what you need down here. I hesitated, glancing around my room. The walls that used to hold my dreams now felt like they were closing in. My eyes landed on the textbook again, still open, still waiting. Okay, I said softly. I'll come. You're doing the right thing, Gracie, he said, the weight of conviction in his voice. After we hung up, I stood in the middle of my room for a long moment. Then I reached for my suitcase, pulled it from the closet, and set it on the bed. My fingers brushed over the spines of my books, pausing on the one I had always kept closest, healing the hidden wound. I tucked it into my bag, alongside Clarice's letter and the business card from Professor Mitchell that I'd kept for months. The house was quiet. Kendra's laughter echoed faintly from her room as she chatted on the phone. Mom was probably reading a magazine downstairs, Dad watching the game. They had no idea. And I wasn't going to tell them, not yet, I was leaving. And this time, I wouldn't be looking back. Grandpa's front porch smelled faintly of sea air and freshly brewed coffee. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't waking up to the sound of clinking dishes or the soft thud of Kendra's designer heels on hardwood floors. Instead, it was the distant call of gulls and the soft hum of waves that stirred me from sleep. The morning light poured in through the gauzy curtains as I blinked awake. It took a moment to remember where I was, not my bedroom in Apple Creek, but a guest room in a small house nestled along Florida's quiet Gulf Coast. Grandpa had insisted I take the room with the best light. Wakes the soul, he said with a wink. Down the hall, I heard the faint clatter of plates and the shuffle of slippers. When I emerged, he was already at the stove, scrambling eggs in his ancient cast-iron pan like it was a sacred ritual. Morning, Gracie, he said without turning. Hope you're hungry. The table was set with care. Mismatched mugs, orange juice in a glass pitcher, 2 slices of toast already buttered, a small vase of wildflowers, fresh, delicate, sat in the center, the same way Grandma used to do it. It smells amazing, I said, sliding into the seat across from him. He smiled as he brought the plate over. You'll need your strength today. We've got a lot to sort through. And we did. After breakfast, he led me into his study, a small sun-drenched room lined with filing cabinets and shelves of books with frayed edges and faded spines. He placed a thick folder on the desk in front of me. These are the bank records, he said quietly. Statements, wire receipts, all of it. And I spoke to my lawyer this morning. Andrew's been with me since the 80s, trustworthy guy. I opened the file slowly. It was all there. Yearly deposits into an educational trust fund under my name, every spring since my high school graduation. Highlighted were the withdrawals. I traced the numbers with my finger, disbelieving. $80,000, I whispered. Gone. They didn't just withhold it, Grandpa said gently. They used it. That's a betrayal, and I won't let it go unanswered. I looked up at him, eyes stinging. But what if confronting them ruins everything? What if they hate me for it? He leaned back in his chair, lacing his fingers together. Sweetheart, they already made their choice when they decided your dreams were worth less than someone else's. You're not ruining anything. You're just no longer letting them decide who you get to be. I nodded slowly. So, what happens now? We call them, he said. We don't scream, we don't accuse. We present the facts, and we give them one chance to do the right thing. Later that afternoon, we sat side by side in the living room, the speakerphone resting between us on the coffee table. My heart thudded in my chest as Grandpa dialed the number. The line rang twice before Dad's voice crackled to life. "Hello? It's Joseph," Grandpa said. "Grace is here with me. We need to talk about the trust fund." There was a long pause. Then, in a voice tight with confusion, Dad asked, "What trust fund?" "The one you've been accessing for 4 years," Grandpa replied evenly. "Don't play dumb. I have the documents." I could hear Mom's voice in the background, sharp, panicked. "Joseph, this is a family matter." "No," Grandpa interrupted. "This is a legal matter. You misappropriated funds meant for Grace's education. You used money that wasn't yours, and now we're asking for a conversation. Before we escalate." There was silence. Then Dad said, "Let's talk in person. Please." After the call ended, I sat back, exhaling slowly. "You were steady," Grandpa said. "Strong." "I feel strange," I admitted. "Like I just broke something I can't fix." "You didn't break it," he said softly. "You're just finally shining a light on the cracks." The sky was turning peach and lavender by the time we stepped out onto the porch. The breeze was cooler now, saltier. I wrapped my arms around myself, watching the sun dip toward the water. "I don't know what they'll say," I murmured. He placed a hand on my shoulder. "Whatever it is, you'll be ready." The next morning, we packed a small overnight bag and headed to the airport. Grandpa didn't say much, but his presence beside me was grounding. When we landed in Ohio, the wind bit sharper than I remembered, like the town itself wasn't ready for my return. Tomorrow, we'd walk into that house and demand the truth. Not a favor, not forgiveness, just the truth. I closed my eyes that night, and for the first time, my dreams weren't about running away, but standing my ground. The air in Apple Creek felt heavier than I remembered. Maybe it was the early November chill or the weight of everything we were about to do. But as Grandpa and I drove through the quiet neighborhoods toward my childhood home, I felt like a thread pulled too tight. We pulled into the driveway just after noon. The same cracked sidewalk, the same flower bed, now wilted with the season. But it didn't feel like home anymore. Not really. Inside, my parents were already waiting in the living room. Kendra sat in the corner, arms folded, her knee bouncing with nervous energy. Mom's face was pale, lips pressed into a line. Dad looked older than I remembered, like the burden of their choices had started to settle into his bones. Grandpa led the way. His steps were firm, deliberate, his cane tapping a steady rhythm as he walked. I followed close behind, clutching a manila folder of documents, photocopies of every transfer, every withdrawal. My proof. "Let's sit," Grandpa said simply, lowering himself into the armchair opposite them. I sat beside him, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. Across the room, Kendra avoided my eyes. "We're here to talk about the trust," I began, my voice steadier than I expected. "The account you've been withdrawing from, the one Grandpa set up for my education." Dad opened his mouth, but Grandpa held up a hand. "Before you speak, I want you to know we brought everything. The lawyers reviewed it. There's no question about what happened. The only thing we need to discuss is what you're going to do about it." Mom shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between us. "We never meant harm, Joseph. Things got out of control." "You let your daughter drop out of college," Grandpa said, his tone sharp but measured. "You told her dream was a hobby. Meanwhile, you were spending money that wasn't yours. On what? New cars, prep classes Kendra barely attended." Kendra flinched. "Hey, No," I interrupted, finally turning to her. "Not this time. You don't get to explain it away." She looked up, startled. Her mouth opened, then closed again. Dad finally spoke. "We thought we could pay it back someday." "You didn't tell me it even existed," I said. "You let me believe I was a burden, while you used my future to fund someone else's." Mom looked down at her hands, fingers ringing. Grandpa leaned forward. "This is what's going to happen. You're going to return every dollar. Grace is going back to school. She'll have her tuition covered and living expenses secured. And you'll sign the agreement Andrew sent over today." Dad rubbed his face, defeated. "We don't have it. Not all of it." "Then you'll figure out a payment plan," Grandpa replied. "Or we take this to court." There was silence. Then slowly, Mom nodded. We'll do it. We'll sign. Grandpa pulled out the documents from his coat and placed them on the coffee table. No one said anything as they signed. The pen scratched faintly against the paper, the only sound in the room. When it was done, I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I hope you understand, I said, Stan. This isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming what you took from me. Kendra stood too. I didn't know about the trust, she said softly, but I knew I got everything. I knew it wasn't fair. I looked at her for a long moment. Then maybe it's time you start building something for yourself, without taking it from someone else. Outside, the wind tugged at the bare branches. Grandpa and I walked down the steps in silence, but as we reached the sidewalk, he paused. You were brave there, he said. I don't feel brave, I admitted. I feel tired. He nodded. That's how you know you're growing. Doing the hard thing doesn't always feel like triumph. Sometimes it just feels like standing up straight after a long time hunched. That night, we returned to our hotel. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what came next: college, graduation, maybe even that counseling practice I used to daydream about. A message blinked on my phone from Kendra. I'm applying for scholarships. I know it's late, but I'm trying. I stared at it for a moment, then put the phone down. Tomorrow I will meet with Andrew and begin the process of reclaiming my enrollment. There were forms to fill out, classes to catch up on, but most of all, there was a life to rebuild. For the first time in a long while, I was the one deciding what came next. I hadn't been back to the university in nearly a year. As I stepped onto campus that crisp morning in late January, a mix of nerves and awe rushed through me. The brick building stood just as stately, the same ivy curled around the old psychology hall, and the air still held that faint scent of brewed coffee and melted snow. But I wasn't the same girl who had walked away in silence. This time, I walked in with purpose. Reinstating my enrollment had taken weeks of paperwork, but Professor Anderson and the registrar's office had fought beside me. They hadn't forgotten me, and neither had the scholarship foundation Clarice had written to a year ago. Her letter had been waiting quietly in my file untouched, like a sealed envelope of faith. I started classes in February. Some familiar faces greeted me with surprise. Others didn't recognize me at all. I didn't mind either way. I wasn't here to explain. I was here to finish what I started. Evenings were different now. Grandpa Raymond had moved into a small bungalow near the university. We shared Sunday dinners, just the two of us, over pot roast or grilled salmon. He'd ask about class, about my professors, about how many clients I hoped to help one day. I saw a little clinic just outside of town, he mentioned one evening, run by retired social workers. They're looking for someone to take over in a few years. I smiled. You already planning my next decade? I like to think ahead, he said, passing me the salt. You've got momentum now, Grace. Don't waste it. Midway through the semester, I was invited to speak on a student panel about resilience in mental health. I nearly turned it down. Public speaking wasn't exactly my thing, but something inside me whispered that maybe it was time. I told the auditorium about psychological trauma, about the silent scars it leaves, about how the strongest people I'd met were those who'd been doubted and dismissed. I didn't name my parents. I didn't need to. I spoke from a place deeper than revenge or sadness, somewhere closer to healing. Afterward, an elderly woman in the front row stopped me on my way out. My granddaughter dropped out last year, she said quietly. She thinks she's a failure, but maybe hearing you tonight, maybe she'll come back. I nodded. Sometimes all it takes is one person to believe in you. For me, that was my grandfather. Spring bloomed fast that year. By May, the cherry blossoms near the library were shedding pale petals along the pathways. On the morning of graduation, I slipped into my black robe, adjusted my tassel, and stood before the mirror in my modest studio apartment. There was a knock at the door. Grandpa stood there in a pressed gray suit, holding a bouquet of blue hydrangeas, my favorite since childhood. You ready, graduate? I nodded, more than ever. The ceremony passed in a blur. When my name was called, I stepped onto the stage with steady feet and found Grandpa in the crowd. He didn't wave, he just smiled, eyes full of a quiet kind of pride. Later that evening, we sat on a bench overlooking the town square. Fireflies danced near the hedges. The courthouse clock struck 7. "There's something I've been thinking about," I said. "Uh-oh," Grandpa chuckled. "That tone always means I should brace myself." "I want to open a counseling practice," I said. "Small, focused on trauma, especially for kids who've been dismissed or left behind." He didn't answer right away, just looked out over the square. "You know," he said softly, "when your grandmother and I set up that trust, we hoped it would give you choices, freedom. Looks like it did." I turned to him. "It wasn't just the money, it was you. You saw me when no one else did." He nodded, lips tight with emotion. "I just did what any decent person should do. Help someone you love, no conditions." We sat in silence a little longer. Across the street, I noticed a small hand-painted sign in the window of an old bakery. "Family isn't always blood." I reached into my bag and pulled out a folded letter. The handwriting was unmistakable, my mother's. "She writes every couple months," I said. "I haven't answered, not yet." Grandpa didn't pressure me, he just nodded again. "You'll know when, or if, you're ready." I slipped the letter back into my bag. I didn't know yet if forgiveness was part of my future, but I knew what wasn't: shame, silence, or second-guessing my worth. When we got up to leave, Grandpa held out his arm like he always did, steady and strong, and I walked forward, not as the girl who had been forgotten, but as the woman who remembered who she was all along. Some endings aren't fireworks or grand applause. They're quiet moments when a girl finally sees herself through eyes of love, not obligation. Grace's journey wasn't about winning a battle. It was about reclaiming her worth in a world that nearly forgot her. True kindness often happens when no one's watching, and the hearts we heal may someday return the gesture in ways we least expect. Just like an old porch light left on through the night, a single act of goodness can guide someone home. If this story reminded you of a time you were seen or overlooked, perhaps today is the day to offer that same quiet light to someone else. After all, we never truly know the weight someone carries until we help lift it.